Okay, so as you would all be aware, running competitions on social media is an incredibly common way to interact with your followers, and it's a really effective way of increasing your reach on social media. So the most common social media competitions that we see are on Facebook, Instagram and Twitter, but we're also starting to see them on Pinterest and YouTube. In your packs that we provided you, there's a summary of how to run competitions on these different types of social media and what is and isn't permitted on each platform. So James, I wonder if you could just quickly give a summary of how you've seen competitions on social media change over the last few years.
Sure, I think because of the sheer popularity of competitions and promotions, I think it actually, in some ways, is probably harder these days to run competitions effectively than in what it was probably 5 years ago. And I don't know if anyone's experienced that directly. So I think what you tend to find, the competitions that generally tend to get the most interest these days are the ones which probably have a little bit more ingenuity behind it. So, for example, I saw a fantastic promotion earlier this year from Reebok, where they did a campaign to promote Reebok pumps on Instagram called Hunt for the Pump, which I think probably means slightly something different in Australia. But with that particular campaign, it was a really ingenious mechanic where they wanted you to basically migrate through a number of photos which Reebok had posted, and then as you went through them and then liked them, it interacted with a microsite and all the rest. So it was, in effect, it was an Instagram scavenger hunt. Likewise, IKEA have done some really interesting competitions on Instagram in the last probably 12 months as well. Not necessarily domestically, but certainly overseas. So I think ingenuity, I think, is really important. I also think as well, contrary to popular belief, a big prize isn't always necessarily that appealing. Often you generally find you actually get better uptake with a lower prize value. Also, the benefit of having a lower prize value is psychologically people believe that they have a greater chance of winning. So, well, they're only giving away a $50 movie voucher, of course I'm going to win. And then they're obviously disappointed. So I think low prize values, I think, work quite well. I think ingenious mechanics work well. But also as well, you've got to support it with advertising. The days of 100% organic performance in social are well and truly over. So the sooner everyone can sort of wake up to that fact, particularly on Facebook, the better. So I think an ingenious mechanic, supportive of advertising, low price value, you're going to be okay, I think.
Cool, thank you. So for the purpose of today, we thought we'd highlight that we're not marketers, and we'd run through a typical scenario of a non-ingenious mechanic giving away a high-value prize. So the scenario we're looking at is the GH Dad 10K competition. The promoter is GH Dad Champagne. Entry is via Instagram, and entrants have to upload a photo of them and their friends enjoying GH Dad Champagne. They have to include a hashtag, and the most creative photo will win $10,000. So I'm going to enter, and this is my entry. And I, as the entrant, am in this photo, and as are my friends Kerry and David. And David is wearing an inflatable cowboy suit, and he has a Hawaiian shirt on. And we're holding a bottle of GH Dad. So leaving aside the suspicious use of the GH Dad brand, let's just talk about copyright for a moment. Normally, the author or creator owns copyright in a work. In this case, I'm clearly in the photo. So I didn't take or create the photo, and I don't own the copyright. But if worded correctly, the T's and C's for the competition can stipulate that by entering, I'm confirming that I have consent from the copyright owner, the photographer, to use the photo for the purpose of this competition. And as well as permission from the copyright owner, I need to ensure that I have permission from Kerry and David to use this photo to enter the competition. This is a privacy law issue for GH Dad because the photo contains personal information of Kerry and David, their images. So correctly worded terms and conditions for the competition will state something like, by entering, you confirm you have consent from all persons shown in the photo or from their parent or guardian, if they're under 18, to submit the photo in the competition. So in this case, we've agreed that if I win the $10,000, we're going to split the money, and David's going to buy some new shirts, and we're going to give our prop department an overhaul. So a few more points on this type of competition. Generally, most promoters want the opportunity to do whatever they like with the entries and photos they receive. That's often a key reason why a competition is being run, so you can get access to the photos and entries. So the T's and C's for this competition should provide enough flexibility for GH Dad to use entry photos for any other purpose. This is often a very broad statement in the terms and conditions, such as the promoter may copy and amend your entry and may use or allow others to use your entry and any rights in relation to your entry to publicise this competition or for any other purpose. These rights are perpetual, royalty-free, worldwide, irrevocable and transferable. So by entering this competition, I accept this term in the T's and C's, although I think it's pretty clear that GHDad won't want to use this photo again. In setting up a competition, it's also important for a promoter to consider the tone that the competition has. You obviously need it to be brand appropriate and target the correct audience, but it needs to not be too wacky or outrageous, and any entries are less likely to infringe copyright or breach any laws. So for example, if GHDad had a vast entrance to show us how GHDad helps you have the best time, then entry photos might have been different. They might have shown people being drunk or acting inappropriately, or more so than we are. Similarly, if the entry question had have been, show us how GHDad is part of your family's Cup Day celebrations, then there probably would have been a high chance of getting children in the photos, which would have breached the Alcohol Beverage Advertising Code, which says that people in alcohol ads need to be over 25. So, to minimise any issues arising from potentially inappropriate photos, even where you're pretty comfortable that the tone is, on track, GHDad still needs to be monitoring incoming photos and removing them and invalidating entrants if necessary. The T's and C's need to be drafted in such a way so as to allow this and to provide GHDad with the flexibility to edit or invalidate entries for reasons as broad as them being obscene, offensive, malicious, discriminatory, indecent, or just otherwise objectionable or inappropriate in the promoter's discretion. So I'll now hand you back to David, who'll talk a bit about what else might happen with my photo.
All right, so just to illustrate a little bit about who owns what in the world of social media, let's take the scenario where a third party happens to see this photo that Alison's posted on Instagram and they decide to use it in their own advertising. And here's what they've done. Looking for a fun evening this racing carnival, join us at Johnny's Tavern. So Johnny's Tavern have just pinched that photo from Instagram. So who owns the photo? Alison said it's the person who took the photograph originally that owns the copyright. Then if we look at Instagram's terms of use, I'll just read this sentence. Instagram does not claim ownership of any content that you post on or through the service. It's the same on Facebook and other platforms. So there's no change to the ownership. The person that took the photograph still owns the copyright in that photo. And in fact, would be able to do something about it if they wanted to. So they could go to Johnny's Tavern and say, take that down, you're infringing my copyright by reproducing my photo, and could even chase them for damages or money. The other thing, well, I suppose from GHDad's point of view, is there anything they can do about it? Probably not. I can't see anything really they can do because they don't own the copyright in the photo. Possibly the three of us in the photo might say, well, Johnny's Tavern, you're misleading the world into thinking that we've personally endorsed your tavern. I don't think that would probably get us very far. It would if we were celebrities though, like if we were Kardashians or somebody who make a career out of being celebrities and endorsing things, then we'd probably have a much better argument. What we want to talk about now is some of the really interesting and innovative things that we've seen in our practice, people doing in social media, and how to manage the legal aspects of that. So one thing we've seen a lot recently is the idea of using geolocation features on the consumer's device. So you know where the consumer is, and you can tie this in very neatly to some social media applications. So an example, this is an example from South Africa, with Boz Iced Tea, and they wanted consumers to try their products. So they created Bev, the incredible vending robot. And when a user was physically close to the machine, and they tweeted with the hashtag BozTweetForTea, the machine spat out a tea beverage for the person to try. Now there is one area of law, if this was run in Australia, that you'd need to be aware of, and that is our privacy and surveillance devices legislation. And the upshot of that is that you would need to notify, or in some cases get the consent of the consumer to that tracking of their physical position via the device. Now I don't think that's too much of a problem in this particular case, and probably for most sort of similar promotions. There's no reason why you can't be upfront with people on Twitter and in all of your advertising around the activity, so that consumers are very clear that their position is being checked. But just bear that obligation in mind. We have seen a couple of proposed activities where the promoter actually wanted to track people's position. They wanted an element of surprise, and they wanted to find out someone's position before the person even knew they were involved in the activity. So that's where it gets a bit problematic. Another thing we've seen recently is the rise of the influencer, and I think James is going to touch on this as well a little bit later on. But influencers in the social media space. So the idea here is that you through a sponsorship type arrangement, you arrange with somebody to make posts on social media that are positive about your brand or your product, and you pay them for it or you compensate them in some way. Now, arguably in Australia, it's a legal requirement that any post of that sort indicates that it's part of a commercial arrangement. So otherwise, consumers could be misled into thinking that it's just a casual post by the celebrity and there's no commercial motivation. So, for example, for a Twitter post, we would recommend including #ad in the post, like in that example there. So that's Eva Longoria promoting cat food. Now, Australia Post is one you might have seen in the media in the last few months who came a little bit unstuck with this, and they were caught out using celebrity influencers, and they had a commercial arrangement with them, but the influencers weren't disclosing that their posts had some sort of commercial arrangement underlying them. Sometimes you see #spawn, S-P-O-N, or some other hashtags. We don't really like #spawn because we don't think consumers will necessarily know what it means. So our preferred hashtag there is #ad. A couple more. This is a real hot topic, this one. The idea of regramming from Instagram for commercial purposes. So you see a post on Instagram and you want to repost it yourself to promote your business. Is that permitted? People say to us, and I know they say it to you as well, Jones, this happens all the time. It must be okay. It's part of Instagram, so consumers must know all about it. And implicitly, when they post a picture to Instagram, they must really be consenting to this. Well, I think there's a couple of problems with that argument. And one is that regramming is actually not a native part of Instagram. So generally, if you are going to regram, the way you do it is you download a third-party app that allows you to in effect, rip the post and repost it. So you can't actually say that regramming is a native part of Instagram, and therefore consumers must implicitly agree to it. The other problem with this is, go back to the idea of who owns the copyright in the photos. It's the person that takes the photo normally. Now, I would hazard a guess that maybe 50% roughly of photos on Instagram are not posted by the person who took the photo. So if you're the subject of a photo, you put up the photo, you don't actually own the copyright, it's the person that took the photo does. So a lot of the time the person posting actually doesn't have any rights that they can pass on. They don't have any right to authorise you to repost because they never owned the copyright in the first place. So there is really a risk of copyright infringement here. Now, what do we say about that? Are we saying don't do it, never regram? I don't think we're saying that because that's just not realistic in the digital world that we're in. But be aware of the risks. Go into this with your eyes open. And if a copyright owner does emerge from the woodwork and assert their rights, just be aware, I guess, that you might have to pull down any infringing materials and you might have to cough up some money. There is one way to reduce risk a little bit with this, and I think it's a good idea. So effectively what you're doing here is trying to get permission from the Instagram community to repost or regram. Now this is from the bio page on Instagram of Tourism Australia, by way of example. So they say tag @Australia, that's Tourism Australia's tag on Instagram, or See Australia or Restaurant Australia to give us permission to repost. Now, I think that is a good idea and that can reduce risk a bit, but I don't actually think the tags that they've chosen there are unusual enough. So the problem is a consumer out there might just happen to choose the hashtag See Australia without realising that Tourism Australia think that means that you're giving consent to repost. So if they chose a more unusual hashtag, it would probably work a bit better. And of course, this doesn't reduce the second risk that I mentioned, which is that the person posting may not own the copyright in the first place. So they've got no rights to agree to reposting. The last one I wanted to mention is the rise of targeting advertising via social media. So here we're really talking about cookies being placed on your web browser when you visit a site, and then the cookie of course collects data about you, and that can be passed on and then used by social media sites and other sites to display targeted advertising to you. There's a privacy law issue here perhaps. So if the cookies collect personal information about you, and they don't always, but sometimes they do collect personal information, that is information about an individual who's identifiable, then you've got a privacy law issue, and your obligation under privacy law is to essentially be transparent. Let the person know that you're collecting their personal information, what are you doing with it, who are you going to disclose it to. So the way to deal with that is to put something in your privacy policy on the website that places the cookie, that explains all about the cookie and what's it going to be used for. And whether that's really sufficient from a privacy law point of view hasn't been tested yet in Australia, but we think for the moment it probably is. So the message there is if you're going to place cookies from your website onto a consumer's browser, then make sure that you've dealt with that properly in your privacy policy. I'm going to hand over to James to talk a bit about what's happening in social media from his perspective.